Good evening, I'm Kelly McCullen, and this is a very special North Carolina Now. We are speaking with Pat McCrory, Republican candidate for governor. Thank you for coming down to RTP and meeting with us here in the studio.
It's great being back. Thank you very much.
Well, 2008 to 2012. What's different about Pat McCrory as a campaigner and as the guy who wants to be the next Republican governor?
Well, I think the main difference is I got even more private sector experience underneath my belt. Of course, I worked for Duke Energy for 29 years. But during the past 3 years, it was actually good for me to step out of the political bubble, especially during tough economic times, and see how tough it is out there throughout North Carolina. And I've been working with manufacturing companies, energy companies, and actually traveling all over the United States in a consulting capacity on strategy to help businesses. And that additional experience is added to my business acumen, which is desperately needed in state government, because we've almost always had governors who did not come out of business and their only experience was state government. And I have experience both coming from the private sector and really experience coming from a mayor's job for 14 years that gives an outside perspective that I think will be needed in state government now more than ever, especially when needed change has to happen.
Yeah, thinking about 2008 and what's happened in 2010, big year for Republicans, 2012. Seems to be different philosophies within the Republican Party. And for every blog that says you've been endorsed by Tea Partiers, there's someone calling you Mitt McCrory. What kind of Republican are you? Are you establishment, traditional? Are you Tea Party? Are you moderate? Are you just plain conservative? Hell, you got to help us here.
I don't think you can put me into any particular silo in politics, because one thing I learned as a mayor is if you try to appease everybody, you appease no one. But, you know, I consider myself a very thrifty, conservative individual. I believe in long-term vision. I believe in making the tough decisions. I believe in strategic approaches and communicating with the public, and I believe in ethical government. But I also understand clearly that it's the private sector that's going to get us out of this recession. And we in government need to do everything we can to complement the private sector and get the private sector to start creating jobs in North Carolina. Our unemployment rate's the 4th worst in the nation. North Carolina, the greatest state in the United States of America, and our unemployment rate is the 4th highest. It's inexcusable. And I'm going to put my business skills, my conservative skills, and my political leadership skills to practice in our state capital and govern the entire state, which is desperately needed.
You were pointing a finger directly at something you call the good old boys and good old girls network. In Raleigh, who's in that network, and do you finger some Republicans in there? You're certainly calling out the Democrats.
Well, actually, it's the Democrats have basically been controlling the state for 100 years. There have been a few 2-year, 4-year cycles where Governor Martin and Governor Holshouser came in, and now the last 2 years where we have a new Speaker of the House for the first time and a Senate president, new president who's, I think, a very capable individual and a good leader. But the fact of the matter is we have had a good old boy and good old girl system. Purdue, Easley, the Tony Rands of the world, Mr. Bassnight. They've been running the state for a long time. And in fact, the 2 or 3 potential front runners that I may be running against if I get through the Republican primary come from that long lineage of that good old boy and good old girl network who have supported, I think, policies that have been ineffective in North Carolina and a culture of ethical indiscretions that are inexcusable.
But those good old boys and good old girls, as you define them, won these elections.
Yeah.
And they were in power.
They were extremely powerful.
What's changed that took them away from power and put you 10, 11 points ahead now of any Democratic challenger if we were to vote in this time frame?
One thing that has changed is the economics have changed dramatically. I think people are understanding that you can't just keep growing government and not know how to pay for it, or take money from the federal government and have no plan on how you're going to pay it back, which happened 2 to 3 years ago when we took $2.7 billion from the federal government for unemployment insurance, and the governor had no plan on how we're going to pay it back, and now that $2.7 billion is being handed over to the future governor to try to solve. And that was inexcusable to accept money without telling the people or having a plan to pay it back. And I think the other thing that's happened, I especially saw this in the East and the West during the last 2 years, people started approaching me and go, I didn't vote for you last time, but I want you to run because I got tired of the false promises and I got tired of the unethical discretions of the current leadership and the corruption. They were embarrassed to be like Louisiana, and North Carolina is better than that. The old Louisiana politics came to North Carolina. Governor Jindal's cleaned it up in Louisiana. I plan to clean it up in North Carolina.
I was going to ask you way later in the interview, but you hit on it. I read where South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley's been down here to see you and help you raise money. Governor Chris Christie, Bobby Jindal.
Yeah.
But also last fall, the Associated Press reported that out down east, some Democrats called, had a fundraiser on your behalf.
Had a fundraiser right next door to Governor Perdue's home.
That is everybody in the political spectrum except maybe the hard right and the hard left.
Yeah.
How do you bridge all of that gap? Because people like clear delineations when they talk their politics right now.
First of all, I have 14 years of experience of being a mayor where I was a Republican mayor in a Democratic city with a Democratic city council all but 2 of my 14 years. So I have the experience to work across party lines, but I never compromised my values or my philosophy. I used the veto 24 times, approximately 24 times as mayor, but it wasn't to necessarily stop a bill, it was to create a better legislation. And almost every case, I only had 3 of my vetoes overridden by a Democratic majority. Only 3, which is a lot different than what we're having right now when the governor vetoed some very strong legislation, and I think we could have had much better communication between the governor's office and the legislature.
I was looking at your campaign literature and the folks who write on your behalf to get your name out there, and words do matter. And you're calling this state government broken. You're calling this economy broken. You have a Republican legislature now has put a big thumbprint, pretty powerful thumbprint on this state. Is it still broken,
Yes.
or do they need your influence to round out the edges where people see
I think
sharp
improvement's
corners?
been made. I think there's been better communications, although in certain circumstances it could have been better. I think they presented tort reform, they want energy reform, they want photo ID, which is desperately needed. But yes, we still have a broken government. We have an inefficient government. We have a lot of duplication. Listen, I went and got my driver's license back last year when I turned 55. And I realized almost nothing's changed as I waited over an hour and a half to go get a basic driver's license renewed with no test. It hasn't changed since I grew up and got my first driver's license in Jamestown, North Carolina in 1972. That's a broken government. If the private sector had stayed so stagnant over the last 40 years, as government has in certain areas, the private sector would be even worse shape than it is today. But government has to change and become more efficient and treat us as customers, not as the boss.
How much of that is culture, bureaucratic culture, and how much of it is corrected through either elevated funding or decreased funding?
I think some of it's culture, a civil service mentality where the goal is to retire and you're not rewarded for productivity and everyone's treated the same regardless of productivity. I'd like to introduce a culture where you reward the best employees, and the employees that aren't doing a good job, you have plenty of resumes to fill it up, and a culture which you treat the consumer as a customer, the taxpayer as a customer. But it has to start at the top. And when employees see the ethical indiscretions, whether it be in the highway patrol or whether it be through DOT or whether it be through campaign finance law being totally ignored by the last 2 governors, it's tough to introduce a culture of performance in state government.
How long do you think it would take you if you want to try that?
If I'm fortunate enough to be elected governor, I think I have a 2-year window, the initial first 2 years, to make the necessary changes of rewarding performance. You're going to have to break through that civil service union mentality that wants to keep the status quo. But I think most state employees know who the good employees are and want the culture to change. I've had so many state employees come up to me and go, Pat, you got to come. You got to come. In fact, just last night in Raleigh, I was having dinner downtown, and 4 retired DOT employees came up to me and said, you've got to come. You've got to come. There is so much inefficiency and employee morale is so low, and we need better productivity and better leadership from the top.
Do you think getting rid of people in state government would make morale better?
It's not necessarily
Not getting rid, but
yeah,
layoffs.
it's not a matter of getting rid of people. It's high performance. We're going to have to get rid of a lot more if we don't change the culture because the state is broke. We have a $2.7 billion bill due to the federal government. We had hundreds of millions of dollars of unfunded liabilities right now with unpaid health insurance for government employees. By law, it says we have a balanced budget in North Carolina. We do not have a balanced budget in North Carolina. How can we have a balanced budget if we have $2.7 billion that we owe? It'd be like you telling your family that everything's fine and ignoring the credit card with thousands of dollars of debt of interest that you owe. That's what we're doing in state government right now. We're misleading the people about the debt that we owe and not including that on the books. If this were the private sector, we'd be in jail.
There are very few candidates. I think only maybe Lieutenant Governor candidate Del Folwell has mentioned the debt accrued by the state to pay unemployment. But if it's $2.7 billion at a fairly high interest rate, I understand, if I remember correctly. If it gets dropped in your lap as governor, how do you pay for that?
We've got to have to figure that out. We don't know yet. But one end where I agree with the representative is that you need to first review the rules of how to get on unemployment and how you stay on unemployment. And are we really encouraging people to look for a job in even areas outside of where they may want to work? Because I meet with industries across the state and they go, we have job openings, but we can't find the qualified people. And so we've got to give encouragement to people instead of just filling an application form and submitting it, which is all you have to do to get unemployment. Are we really encouraging them to look for a job?
You're looking for education. I would presume a big issue in this race, and it will be if you win the nomination, because there are proposals on the table from Governor Perdue to raise a bit of a sales tax, less than 1 penny on the dollar, to institute a new one. It wouldn't be a restoration of the old one, of course. What's the right sales tax policy to get the state through funding gaps and issues as we've experienced them in 2011 and 12?
This is the problem I'm having with the current leadership of North Carolina, is they talk about the budget as opposed to talking about the process and how to get the results. They talk about the budget of education as though the budget educates children. No, the teachers and the curriculum educate our children. And yet all this discussion is, well, if I spend $10 more, will the person get a better education? No, you got to first fix a broken education system. We have an unemployment rate that is totally unacceptable in North Carolina. We have people graduating from high school right now that if you talk to employers, they don't have the basic English skills or writing skills to fill out an application, and yet they've gotten their high school degree. We have freshmen courses at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and other universities where they have to take remedial math and remedial English for people who have been accepted to our university system. To me, that's a duplication of resources, and we need to fix the front end before we ask for more money from the taxpayers. And you know, I'm going to be proposing a totally new concept in K through 12 education, a vocational training track, path, a curriculum where you can take and be ready for a 2-year tech career, or you can take a 4-year college curriculum, but you'll have a choice. We're failing our kids right now, and I'm going to be announcing those proposals just within days right now of changing the whole curriculum and giving more local control also to our counties, which they don't need to be controlled just out of Raleigh.
How do you handle that delicate balance when you're looking at a child and the parent? Because every child can grow up to be the astronaut, the president, the governor of North Carolina, but you're going to create a track that's a 2-year vocational degree, and they're very valuable jobs, but the allure of the university is where everyone should go.
I disagree. I think there are 2 successful career paths. One is a 4-year degree and maybe getting a college degree, and maybe you can become an astronaut, but also the 2-year technical degree where the one who build the engine for the astronauts to get them in space. I respect that just as much as I do the astronauts. And we've got to get out of this culture where we don't respect vocational and trade schools. Our economy needs it. I have a great deal of respect for the person who can be a bricklayer or can fix the pipe or the infrastructure in this room. And because it's a skill I don't have. My wife reminds me of this all the time. And they deserve the pay. And many of those kids I went to Ragsdale High School in Jamestown, North Carolina. Across the street was then Guilford Technical Institute. a lot of those, my colleagues made a lot more money than I did going the technical route. I respect that. They deserve it.
Do you see that technical route taking high school students prior to high school graduation into the community college system, or do you go back to rebuilding the auto shop and the wood shop and maybe plumbing and bricklaying in high school?
I think we could share the resources. We don't need to duplicate the resources between the community colleges and the high schools and the universities. And right now, while we're asking for more money and the legislature and the governor are arguing about the budget, in business, what you do is go, okay, where do we have duplication, where do we have overlap, and where do we have lack of efficiencies? And in all three areas, we have all those elements that are costing the taxpayers a lot of money and that are bringing the state in more and more debt, which is going to be very harmful to the next generation of kids in our city and states.
What did this current state budget do to public education in North Carolina? It seems the Republicans say they wound up cutting 1/2 of 1 percentage point from what Beverly Perdue proposed.
I think it was pure political spin on both sides about the budget. I think the media fell for it hook and line.
Okay, well, if we
because the budgets were almost identical. The budgets were almost identical, and they should have spent more time, the both of them, on how can we revise education and meet the market needs of North Carolina? How can we get our kids jobs and teach them what they need to get jobs? Instead, they argued about 1/2 of 1% of the total budget of education for North Carolina, as opposed to fixing education. And I think the argument's been, on all sides, rather one-dimensional.
Looking at that budget, are the schools funded at a proper level? According to your perspective, do they need more money, or do they need less money?
See, there
it's all about the money.
It's all about it's not all about the money. That's the point. It's about the results. And we've got to start talking about the results. Why are certain schools who've actually reduced their budget doing better than schools that have a higher budget? And it's probably because they have a better processes getting in. They probably are rewarding the teachers who are doing good work. And we need to reward the teachers who are doing good work. We need to start using long-distance technology and sharing the best teachers across the state. We're living in the 1950s in education right now. In probably 80% of our education, we're teaching the exact same way. The same design of the schools, the same curriculum as I took at Ragsdale High School in 1974.
Your literature.
It's 2012. It's time to move.
Well, we've got them through the 12th grade, but the universities you've written a bit about, and there's some things out there if you Google it about the inflation of tuition, which I found an interesting phrase, a use of phrase. Are you blaming the Board of Governors or university people for instituting artificial inflation in tuition, or is it just the rising cost of education something that as governor you want to tackle? I
think the blame is across the board. The blame is from frankly, the students who are maybe requesting things that they don't need, and the parents. I think the blame goes for the Board of Governors of possibly not asking how can we get rid of inefficiencies and really have one university system as opposed to each university fighting for their own turf, which is happening as we speak today. I blame the abundance of administration, that the money we have in administration versus actual teaching. I think we can ask more of professors. We have no choice. We have to do it differently than we're doing today, and to just concentrate on the budget and the status quo is going to be a major mistake for North Carolina. One thing I've learned as a mayor, and I'll take this philosophy to the governor's office, you got to prepare for the future. And to do that, you better keep up with the competition and beat the competition to the punch. We're not doing that with our education program. We used to do it in North Carolina.
Republicans,
but we don't anymore.
Republicans have hit you a time or two, even back in 2008, about that sales tax you put on in Charlotte to pay for light rail. And you told NBC 17, hey, I took this to the people and they voted to approve it.
Twice.
Let's talk about direct democracy.
Right.
And wonder what policies is it best to go to the people and say, you vote this up or down and I'll honor your opinion? And how much of it is sort of kicking that responsible leadership that you're elected to say, this is what we need and I'll take my hit if it doesn't go my way?
I think 95% of the time we have a republic form of government where we as leaders need to make the tough decisions. Where I made a decision to take it to the people, first the state legislature required me to do that. The only way we could get the bill passed to give us that permission, through the state legislature, and the governor at that time was to require a vote of the people, so I had no choice. But the second is we were talking about something totally outside the sphere of local government that had never been done before. And that allowed more consensus building. And when we initially got 58% of the vote for it, and then a recall was voted on again, and I think we won by 70%. So it allowed me to bring in the people and be more inclusive, but I think that has to be extremely selective, because the problem we're having is the leaders that are elected in a republic form of government have to make the tough decisions.
And have you found the Republican leadership since 2011, have they been willing to make tough decisions, as tough as you'd like to see? Or have they taken a moderated stance? No,
actually, they've made some very difficult decisions with regard to the budget, with regard to tort reform, with regard to gas exploration, which we should have started the process 4 years ago, but we've sat on the sideline until Governor Perdue took her secret trip to Pennsylvania, which should have never been secret. She should have been proud to take the trip, but she should have taken it 4 years ago. No, they've made some extremely tough decisions and some very unpopular decisions. I haven't agreed with all the processes and the decisions, but I know they're working extremely hard.
You've consulted in the private sector with companies regarding energy issues, and as the chief officer of this state, what do you think of natural gas fracking?
I think natural gas exploration, or the term fracking, is a very viable thing that we must do in North Carolina. They're doing it in Pennsylvania, they're doing it in other states. In fact, I think we're being rather hypocritical. If you're willing to take natural gas from other areas of the country where they do it and not do it ourselves, then I think we're being hypocrites. And I feel the same way about offshore drilling. Every time you fill up your gas tank and yet you say you're against offshore drilling here, but you agree with it on the Gulf or off the coast of Venezuela, then I think we're being quite hypocritical. We also need the jobs desperately. I mean, the unemployment rate is over 10% in North Carolina, and some of the counties that would benefit, the unemployment rate's over 15%. I mean, they are in bad shape right now, and we need to give these people an opportunity. Plus, in energy, our country is dependent right now on Venezuela and Nigeria and Saudi Arabia and Russia for our future energy supplies. And as long as we're independent on those countries, our independence is threatened, and our gas prices will continue to be high.
What's the balanced energy policy look like in North Carolina? The conservatives are really on the fracking train, and they would lead you to believe it's the land of milk and honey if we just start fracking and drilling, and then the other side says, no, don't do any of it, you'll ruin your property. What's the balance here?
Well, there is a balance. The problem is the governor has not worked on any of it during the past 4 years. I think during the past 4 years we could have been recruiting companies to come to North Carolina while at the same time developing the necessary regulations and environmental rules and funding rules of where the money goes to the local, state government. We could have been working on that for 4 years. Instead, we take a secret trip to Pennsylvania in the last several months of the governor's term. That's not leadership.
4 years ago or so, when the Democrats ruled Raleigh, the Republicans made a big scene about the gasoline tax. Let's cap it so it can't get any higher. If it's not a reduction, it would at least top out. But no action. Maybe one chamber took some action, the other one went home. Didn't do anything about the gasoline tax. How do you view the balance of the revenue that brings in versus capping it under the strategy of lowering pump prices?
If I have an opportunity to reduce a tax, the first tax I will reduce is the income tax, which I think will have a bigger impact on jobs in North Carolina than anything else. We're not even competitive with next door neighbor. Nikki Haley's tearing us up. I was with her several weeks ago. I mean, they're killing us in economic development recruitment. Tennessee is doing an extraordinary job. Virginia. And one of the reasons is our income tax and our corporate tax is not even competitive with our next door neighbors. So that would be the tax first if we can reduce it. Our economic development agenda is very haphazard in North Carolina, very inconsistent and contradictory. And I want to develop a long-term economic development strategy. We do not have that at this point in time, despite some good people, including our head of the Department of Commerce.
One of the last questions I want to ask you is, under your leadership as governor, you'll be coming in to a Raleigh that is ruled by Republicans, but you'll also be governor. Do you expect Tom Tillis, Phil Berger to follow your lead because you are the governor? Or do you fit in under their leadership and play nice? Is that the word I want to use?
I expect us to be a team, but within a team, I also will anticipate some sort of disagreement and conflicts. I have that in my own family. But I anticipate a team approach, whereas the executive, I will set the overall policy and strategy of where the state needs to go for the next 20, 25 years. And in education and infrastructure, in the environment, in the economy, and economic development policy. And I will develop a strategy and then ask for their help with legislation. And I'll let them deal with the details of the legislation. I'll review it, but if I disagree with it, I may veto their efforts. There's never a 100% agreement, but we will be open, we'll be transparent, we will be ethical, which is needed.
This is Pat McCrory running for the Republican nomination for governor in North Carolina in 2012. Thank you, sir, for being on the show.
It's an honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for watching tonight's program. We'll see you next time.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.